currently live on Facebook and will be available to view later. Welcome and thank you for joining the ERA Coalition for our town hall regarding Gen Z and the ERA. My name is Amina Sanusi, and I am a senior at Howard University going to law school next fall and the lead intern at the ERA Coalition. And I will be your moderator for tonight's conversation. The ERA Coalition has over 115 member organizations across the country representing millions of people. I am joined by a fantastic host of panelists who I will be introducing in a bit. We are having this conversation amidst the transition of President elect Biden and Vice President elect Harris. Both of them were very outspoken about the importance and the necessity of the Equal Rights Amendment on their campaigns. The Equal Rights Amendment will prohibit discrimination based on one's sex. Now that they have been elected into office, it is up to us Americans to ensure that they keep their promise by urging the archivist to certify the ERA and the new Senate to pass a bill that will remove the time limit placed on the ERA. Gen Z played a key role in this past election, and tonight we will be discussing how Gen Z can continue to use their platforms to advocate for the certification of the ERA and how the ERA will impact the future of Gen Z. Before we begin our discussion, it is my pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists. Rosie Couture is a high school student and the co-founder and executive director of Generation Ratify, which is a youth-led organization that mobilizes youth from across the country to take action and ratify the ERA and advance gender equality. Caleb Simmons, a senior basketball player at San Jose State University. He is the foundation director of Athletes for Changes, which is an organization that confronts systemic racism by working for humanity and civil rights. To enable students to vote, Caleb and his organization got the National College Athletic Association to declare November 3rd a mandatory day off for student athletes. Haley Dickinson, a 17-year-old vice president of ERA Minnesota and the District 4 representative of the Minnesota Youth Council. She is also the executive director of Lipstick and Rage, a publication uplifting the voices and stories of women and their advocates. Jules Henningberg is a professional player and an all-star in the Premier Lacrosse League. He has recently taken the next step in his activism as a leader of the Black Lacrosse Alliance, which is the collective group of Black players playing at the highest level in lacrosse, working to advocate, represent, educate, and create a more inclusive culture in the sport of lacrosse. Jude Schroeder is a filmmaker, storyteller, and artist. An advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment, they premiered their documentary ERA in Arizona in the spring of 2020. Jude is an advocate for social change and has worked with ERA Task Force Arizona, the League of Women Voters, Phoenix chapter, and the Arizona National Organization of Women. Now let's start this conversation. You all are doing amazing work leading various organizations. Could you please talk a bit more about the work you do? Rosie, I would like for you to start us off and talk a bit more about the work that Generation Ratify does.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Amina, for opening it up, and to Amina and all the other ERA Coalition interns and the ERA Coalition for hosting this panel. As Amina was saying, my name is Rosie. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am one of the founding mothers, as we say, and the current executive director of Generation Ratify, which is the youth-led movement to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment and advance gender equality in the United States. And we do just that. We work to educate young people about current gender inequalities in our country, about the Equal Rights Amendment, which not a lot of young people know about. And we work with young people to advocate for feminist policies on the local, state, and national level and how to organize on the ground for those, as well as talking to legislators and lobbying. We do a lot of electoral organizing, working to elect pro-ERA candidates. It's really important that we have allies in Congress and in state legislatures helping us along the way to ratify this amendment and certify it into the Constitution. And we also just work to provide a culture of empowerment for young women identifying non-binary, gender non-conforming, and femme folks. And that is Generation Ratify in a nutshell. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about the importance of Gen Z in this fight. So I will go ahead and stop talking for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Caleb, could you talk a bit more about the work that Athletes for Changes does?
So right now, we're primarily on social media. Basically, we're advocating and we're literally showing with our platform with what we can do on how we can impact so many people with education about social justice, equal rights. Honestly, it boils down to even just being a good person and letting people know the truths behind a lot of the reality that we live in and a lot of the stuff that we see that in mainstream media sometimes it's not true. So really, we're trying to uplift our community, humanity with news. On our social media platform, we've been able to enact 2 different levels of activism: grassroots activism, scholarly activism, and sport-based activism, like I said. So really, the fact that we're all student athletes, we touch a large platform. So we have a lot of people that are athletes that from all over the world that tap in and really get a better understanding of what is going on here and how they can help. And we're just always constantly providing resources and education for those people.
Great, wonderful. Continuing on with this conversation about athletes and equality, Jules, would you like to talk a bit more about the Black Lacrosse Alliance?
Definitely. First off, I just want to say how excited I am to be on here with everyone. It's been a blast so far getting to know everyone on the call. But the Black Lacrosse Alliance, we started this summer, it's our second year playing in the Premier Lacrosse League. So professional lacrosse is broken up through a couple of leagues right now. We have 2 outdoor leagues and 1 indoor league. Our 1 outdoor league is really the most popular on social media, which obviously is a big deal in terms of activism. So the collective group of players in that league came together this past summer and formed the Black Lacrosse Alliance. And it's a collective group of Black players across now the entire professional spectrum that we've been able to gain traction through. And our mission really is to change the culture of lacrosse, to be more inclusive and inspire and encourage a more diverse generation of lacrosse players. Right now, I think we only had this past summer playing total across all rosters, 20 Black players out of more than 400 players playing. So definitely one of the big things we want to do is diversify the game more. And that kind of, happens in a lot of different ways. So we're looking at it in terms of education and culture, grassroots development, and then, the professional game development and what that looks like. So we're excited to kind of continue to grow with it, but it's been an awesome start so far. And we've made a lot of progress with it.
Great, thank you for that. Going on to Jude, who has created this ERA in Arizona documentary and has worked with ERA Task Force in Arizona. Could you please talk a bit more about the work that you've done?
Sure. Thank you so much, Amina, and thanks ERA Coalition for hosting this panel. I'm honored to be here. So I am a filmmaker, and I created a documentary which premiered earlier this year in March about the Equal Rights Amendment within the Arizona context. I was born and raised in Arizona, and I think that it's a really unique state. For those of you that don't know, it's becoming a swing state, and we actually our electoral votes went for Biden this year. We also have now 2 Democrat senators. So it's really interesting to see how the Arizona that I grew up in is kind of evolving. And so that's where I really do a lot of my activism, is within this state and in this space. It's kind of interesting to see how we've, got a fighting chance to, we didn't become the 38th state to pass the ERA, but we were trying. And we're trying to, increase gender equality in general here. ERA Task Force AZ has been fighting for the ERA for a long time. I've also worked with the League of Women Voters and the Arizona chapter for the National Organization of Women. And besides doing sort of this research and creating the documentary on the ERA in our state, I also have kind of taken on an activist role, like a filmmaker activist role. And I do, I've made ads this year trying to get pro-equality candidates into the state legislature, because, one of the strategies for ERA ratification that I've seen is like a 50-state strategy. Like, let's just try to get it through every state if we can. Even though we've hit the 38, we want to show that we stand for this amendment, that we stand for gender equality, that we stand for equality in general. And I think that it's still important to try to elect equality candidates to Arizona, and to try to make other policy changes if we can. So that's sort of the work that I'm doing right now. And yeah, that's a good summary, I think, to start off.
Amazing. And lastly, I would like to go to Haley, as the Vice President of the ERA Minnesota and also the Executive Director of Lipstick Rage. Could you please talk more about the advocacy work that you're doing?
Yeah, so with ERA Minnesota, obviously we're trying to pass the ERA in Minnesota. Our legislature mirrors pretty much what's going on in the US legislature the past couple of years, and it's become a really big issue to try to get gender on the bill, but that's especially important at this point, is to make sure that even though it's like a small piece of language, that gender is a really important piece of this piece of legislation. And then as for Lipstick and Rage, basically what we do is we are a publication that uplifts some of the work that women and advocates are doing across the country and across the world. So our team of contributors writes articles and really works to build a community of support and of empowerment for women across the world. So that's some of the work that I do.
Great, thank you. So I know you guys are doing amazing work on such a large national level, but I want to talk a bit more about how do you see the ERA impacting your individual lives as members of Gen Z? So I will open up the floor to whoever wants to go ahead and start. Oh, Rosie.
Yeah, I mean, I can go ahead and kick it off. I think, well, first of all, I think Gen Z largely doesn't know what the ERA is. And I feel like a lot of young people just don't even really see how gender inequality exists today in a lot of facets of our lives. But in reality, like the ERA is going to do so much for young people.
I believe you're on mute, Rosie. We'll come back to Rosie. Jude, if you want to go ahead and talk about the impact ERA has on your life as a Gen Z.
Sure. I mean, I totally agree with what Rosie was saying, and hopefully you can fix your mic soon, but let me know if you get it fixed, and I'll give you the floor. I think that the ERA, it's exactly like Rosie was saying, the ERA is going to do so much that like Gen Z doesn't really know is a problem. It's one of those things where like until you're sort of faced with it, you might not necessarily know that that you don't actually have these protections. I think that 80% of Americans something like that, believe that we already have gender equality in the Constitution, but the reality is we don't. And that's what the ERA is trying to do, is trying to put the word sex into the Constitution and make it a protected class. And so along with that protection comes, like strict scrutiny in court. And there's so many ways that we would be protected, not just women, but all people in America based off of this classification. So you can't face any workplace discrimination. We still face a gender pay gap. So, we might see more court cases or protections that would make salaries more equal across gender. And we would see protections in cases of sexual harassment or assault. There's a lot. I mean, the list could keep going, really. There's a lot of things that like we might not necessarily realize is still a problem, but that will impact a lot of people, I think, in our lifetimes. And that was something that I was kind of shocked to learn about when I first realized that we didn't have gender equality in the Constitution. But once I realized that was a problem, that's why I became an activist for it, because it's so crucial that we have this protection, and I can't believe that we still don't.
Right, exactly. So I would like to direct this question towards Jules and Caleb. The ERA is often connected to achieving equality for women in the US, but how do you see the ERA as an amendment that will benefit young boys and men?
Jules, I'll let you take this one.
All right. I think in terms of just like the United States as a whole, I think culture is really important, across all industries, organizations, just society. The ERA to me is kind of just cementing an improvement in that culture of our country, because it really just solidifies, what we know to be true already, and that is everyone's equal under the law, regardless of your sex. For me personally in sports, just recently the conversations around like Sarah Fuller, for example, it's really disheartening sometimes, I think, hearing from my contemporaries that are so misguided about things. And a lot of that stems from how they're raised, the media, and just like the culture of our country. And young boys and men, I believe, don't realize the value of women in our society as a whole, and how important those relationships and dynamics really are to moving forward and improving as a whole. So I think things like this, like the ERA, that most people aren't even considering to be issues, they're feeding this culture that we're seeing in this country, that are contributing to the issues that are day to day. And you see it in sport all the time. You see it in the WNBA right now. You see it just in the conversations, like I said, that we're having about sport. So I think being able to solidify these things on a higher level has that trickle down effect into the smaller parts of the country. And I think that being able to kind of move forward on something that we all know to be true already can really just help cement that.
Yeah, just to, I agree with everything you just said. Obviously the culture right now is, it's really beautiful, because really we can take this to new heights, and having an understanding that people are obviously equal, but having women in those important rooms and those important meetings that happen behind closed doors, because, for example, like you said, the WNBA, there's a significant pay gap between what the salary is of one player and what it is of an NBA player. So really like establishing a new culture for everybody to understand that, look, there is a problem, and look, we're trying to ratify this problem. That's a really big, important step, because a lot of people don't even know about the serious gap that exists within the difference between men and women's sports and salaries. And you see it now, like just the fact that there aren't that many women within men's sports and vice versa. So really establishing this will do a lot for our generation to come.
Yes, I think I can unmute now. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry about that earlier. But just to chime in, I think something that's really important to talk about is how when we are fighting for one particular marginalized group or community and we are working to uplift them, we're working to uplift everyone. So when we are working to make sure that women and non-binary people, gender non-conforming people can, have a more level playing field, we are fighting for everyone. With that said, the ERA helps all genders, and that includes men. We can specifically look at like family court. And there are some instances where women are favored over men, specifically, as I was saying, like in family law, and the ERA could help to combat those inequalities. And I also think it's really important to look beyond the gender binary too. I feel like it's super left out of the conversation how the Equal Rights Amendment really is for all genders and not just men and women. It does have the word sex in the actual language of the amendment. And we know that sex and gender are different things today. But given precedent of the word sex, the amendment truly is an amendment that stands for all genders. And I think it's up to Gen Z to kind of change the conversation around that, and to make sure that we are fighting for an amendment that we believe is fighting for everyone.
Great. Love that. Love that. So I would like to go to Haley and ask, what do you think motivates Gen Z to be very outspoken about social justice and equality issues?
I think that Gen Z sees that these issues have been around for a long time. They've been, issues like white supremacy, toxic masculinity, gender inequality, they've been made worse by the current administration and by what's going on in the world, but they've been around forever. And I think that it's just that people have had enough, people understand that the systems that we are living under still hold a lot of oppression, and that the roots of this country and the way that we came to be, there's still traces of that. And so I think that young people are taking a different approach and understanding that this is a systemic issue, among a lot of different issues, including gender inequality, and are being more bold about dismantling those systems.
Great. What about Jude? I know you've done a lot of work and talked with different people from different generations when you were coming up, like putting together your documentary.
Yeah, I really admire the generations that came before us, and I'm so thankful for the work that they've done. But one of the themes that I noticed when I was making my documentary and doing this research was that there's still so much more to go, and there's just been so many obstacles. So I think that while like I'm so grateful for those activists that came before me, my goal is to like spread awareness about this more, so that as a generation we can sort of come together and say like, come on, like let's get this done, because and there's always going to be opposition and obstacles, but the more people that we can like bring into this issue and sort of show them what's going on, I think the more pressure we can put on our leaders to actually like get this through, until we sort of show up and say, hey, like your job is on the line because you're not letting us vote on this, you're not letting it through. I'm not sure that we're gonna get very far with it. So that's why I wanted to, and that's sort of one of the issues I see with my friends and my peers, is they didn't know that this was a thing. So how can I, ask them to sort of show up if like they first didn't even know that the ERA was an amendment that we really need to get into the Constitution. So, and it's great though to see their sort of the journey of people that I meet once they realize that this is an issue, they're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? Like, let's get this done. So there's so much passion and spark there. And I think once we just sort of enlighten people a little bit and say like, hey, like, did you know that this was an issue? It's so cool to see sort of that like fire light in them. And I think that that's the true potential of Gen Z and young people, is that there's so much fight that we have to give. We just sort of need to like awaken it a little. So I think that that's where I see like my role is representing people like me and sort of like spurring on people who are my age and kind of telling them like, yo, we need to get gender equality into the Constitution. And once they know what to do, they're like more than happy to write our senators in Arizona. We were sending letters to Martha McSally like all the time before she got voted out. And I'm so excited that now we have 2 Democratic senators, because hopefully those are 2 votes to remove the deadline for the ERA. And I feel like young people turning out to vote like was a huge contributor to that switch in Arizona. So that's something that gives me hope, was how this recent election turned out, and I think a way that we could really make change.
Great. Jude actually grazed over the topic of opposition. So I would like to ask, especially those who are in the sports world, Jules and Caleb, have you ever had to deal with oppositions to topics about equality, social justice, by Gen Z or people from other generations?
Yeah, really, I feel like the older generations have always given us pushback because their norm is far different than ours and the reality that we live in today. You know, obviously, like I'm saying, the culture needs to change so that we can have a better future. But basically, the opposition has come from the top down, the people who don't really want to adapt to the nature of society and where it is today. You see it a lot where people who are so fixated on things never changing and really not giving the power to women to be in positions to have the ability to do the big things that the men do. Like, for example, being in the collegiate realm, an athletic director, the president of a university. These are things that right now there are very few in number, and I'm glad to say that I go to a school now that has both a female president, and a female athletic director. So, seeing that a lot of men are always generally in these positions, they're most of the time they end up being the opposition because simply they always say that they don't feel that certain women can do this kind of a job because of all of the extracurriculars that they put into it, which is truthfully not the case. Saying that really that the women can do everything that the men do is obviously what should be the norm and what should be established already, but the opposition is definitely there. And like I said, we're just doing everything we can to change that narrative.
Yeah, Caleb, I think, definitely in terms of the older generations, we saw, some difficulties for us. I think, in the Premier Lacrosse League, for example, this summer, we saw a lot of pushback from our contemporaries. So, not Gen Z necessarily, but, some of the older guys in our league and even some of the younger guys as well. But lacrosse is a predominantly, affluent white sport across the board. And, with that comes a lot of difficulties just in itself, a lot of white men that are affluent. And I think that, we're really trying to change the culture. And this summer it was hard. Like we had to have a lot of really tough conversations with guys kind of going into our tournament. You saw it in a bunch of different sports leagues. I think guys were, really trying to make a stance. You saw it in the NBA, you saw it in the NHL, and then obviously the WNBA, I think, took the strongest lead of any league really. But for us, in order for us to go into this summer to take a strong stance, it took, for me personally, over 30 hours of conversation, kind of leading the Black players, going back and forth with a lot of white players and different guys on different teams that were opposing us taking a strong stance for this. And a lot of the conversation was, stuff that you would be shocked if I repeated it. And I think that was hard for us because it's coming from our teammates. It's coming from guys we've been playing with for so long. And it's also coming from, people that are leaders in our sport. And, we got through it, but it was definitely, took a lot of courage and a lot of bandwidth and hard conversations to get to that point to where we wanted to be this summer to really represent, everything that was happening in a positive way and in a way that we want the game to move forward with.
Rosie, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah. Honestly, like when talking about the ERA and opposition that we face, I think so much of it just comes out of ignorance and out of places of privilege, kind of as Jules was saying. People that are not understanding where we are coming from are speaking from such a place of privilege and of ignorance. And so we have to have those tough one-on-one conversations with people, pointing out the issues, getting people to recognize their privilege, and more importantly, getting people to kind of use their privilege for good and to help give others platforms. But I agree with what, you know, Jules and Caleb are saying. But I definitely don't want to overlook how much of a problem I think this has been with young people talking about the ERA and gender equality.
Great, great. So next question is, was there a moment in your life that precipitated you to take action and get involved in the activism world? And what excites you the most about the ERA? I know since Haley does really close work with ERA Minnesota, would you like to start?
Sure. I guess I wouldn't say I had like a specific moment pertaining to getting involved in gender inequality work. But I would say that the biggest thing that excites me about the ERA is how it plays into educational equity. You know, the way that it impacts or would impact Title IX and other things, and just make sure that young women and all young people are entitled to equitable education. And I think it's not going to solve the issue of not having equity in education, but I think that it's a really big step and something that's definitely what excites me most about the ERA being passed.
Jude, would you like to add on?
Sure. I think that my journey as an activist and getting involved like has a lot to do with like my identity, like my gender identity and like being a queer person. It's like I think I have like a lot of like personal skin in the game. So that's sort of what motivates me to do this work, is that like I'm personally affected by the laws that we have in this country and the Constitution, and whether or not the ERA is in it or not, like will have a lot of impact on my life, and people who are like me. And I really want to fight for people who are trans, non-binary, for women. Those are all identities those are all things that I've identified as or do now. So I growing up identifying as a woman, I feel like I can understand that struggle. And now that I identify as non-binary and transgender, there's an added element to it. And I love how Rosie was saying how the ERA is not just for women. It's for like lots of marginalized groups and all these gender identities that we can have, for, you know, gender non-conforming people, for non-binary people, for femme people. I'm most excited about that possibility. In my research and when I was making the documentary, it was something that I was actually really interested in, and I sort of delved into whether or not the definition of sex legally would pertain at all to LGBT people. At the time when I was making the doc, which was released in March, I didn't really think that I thought that was a long shot, like a pie in the sky dream. And then all of a sudden, you know, the Bostock case happened this summer, and my preconceived notions about what the ERA could do like was kind of turned on its head in terms of like what it could do for LGBT people. So that is what most excites me, and it fuels me even more to like advocate for the ERA, because it's not just for, you know, the binary definition of sex that we might have had when the ERA was originally written. It's, you know, this conservative court has shown that there's a possibility that they might interpret the word sex to mean protections for people based off of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So that is something that I didn't think was possible. And then, you know, Gorsuch writing that majority opinion and saying, hey, this actually is wrong. We can't discriminate based off of your sexual orientation, your gender identity. That was huge for me. So I mean, I was excited about the ERA before even, and I was motivated to do the work before when I just thought that it would be, you know, for cis women, but now I'm just over the moon about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Rosie, would you like to add?
Yeah, no, Jude, yes to just everything you said. And I think even beyond talking about gender, we know that discrimination on the basis of sexuality is a subset of gender-based discrimination. So just like tagging that along. But yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about the ERA because in my eyes, it's about like toppling over the whole damn system. I mean, the Constitution was written in mind for white, landowning Protestant men, you know, and our whole country was built off of that idea. And although the ERA is just one reform that we can make to our Constitution, it is one huge step that we can take towards this notion that all people are created equal and deserve to be protected to the highest extent in our Constitution and in the law that rules our land.
You know, just to touch on, you know, how I got involved. For me, it started on the side of racial injustice and racial inequality. For me, is really where I became like the roots of my activism, and it's really blossomed into activism for really on so many different spectrums. For me, I know that within the realm of athletics, we have to deal with race in sport and race in America for the large majority of my life. And even my time in high school and while I'm still in college, like I've just been seen as an athlete. And for me, breaking the norm has been very important to me in my work, because there are so often times that, you know, even LeBron James, the best at the best and one of the most important athletes in American history, was also told to shut up and dribble and to just shut up and just stay in your lane and to conform to your lane and only being an athlete. So I know for him and for myself, it's motivation to continue to do more for the culture, for the people that are going to come after us. That's why speaking on this beautiful panel with all of you, it's motivating and encouraging and it's uplifting to me, because I know that there are good people in this world. And, you know, for the large majority of my life, I just thought that there were so many bad people. But the influence now, I feel like really establishing a new culture is really important, because what we see now is, like Rosie said, who really, like, going back, who wrote the Constitution, and, you know, what did it truly entail, and who was it designed for? So, you know, ratifying all of that, I feel like the RA would really be a big step, and not only changing, I feel like, some of the course of history to come, but to make some things right. And I feel like this would be a really big step.
Yeah, I'll kind of just contribute. First off, just hearing everyone speak is so inspiring. Like Rosie, every time you open up your mouth, I'm just like, wow, like this is awesome. Just to say that. But I think for me, it's been an interesting dynamic, because my family's kind of always been tied to activism. My grandfather, he was a civil rights activist in New Jersey. He was one of the first presidents of the Greater Urban North Coalition. He was their CEO for 12 years, and he, you know, really worked to resolve a lot of the strikes that happened in Newark, the Newark teacher strikes in the 70s, and the Stellarite tenant strike, which was the largest public housing strike at the time in the nation. He also hosted Positively Black on NBC for a number of years in the 70s. So I've always felt, you know, just growing up in my household, a calling for something greater, and a need to be a leader in general. But I think just playing lacrosse, which again is just like a predominantly white sport, it's been hard for me and a kind of a battle to achieve success in the sport while also trying to be an activist. It's difficult, and it's kind of a microcosm of the US in a lot of ways, because of the power dynamics and the toes you don't want to step on, and the kind of the politics you have to play to kind of move up, to get recruited and to, you know, stay on a certain team, or to not get traded, or, you know, to really just achieve success for yourself personally and for your team without, you know, ending up like a Colin Kaepernick or being put in those positions. So I think for me, it's been difficult to kind of balance and toe that line. I remember in 2017, I was a junior in college, and the idea of any of us taking a knee on our team, like, oh, the 3 Black kids, like, you probably would have ended up, really as an outlier on your team and having difficulties with your coach at that point in time. So, I think it's been a kind of an ongoing process to make sure I could solidify myself to, be in a position where my voice couldn't be denied based on, my leadership on my team and kind of the player I was. And I think once I felt comfortable with that and felt like enough of us could band together, I felt like that's when I, was confident enough to take a step. And it goes just to show like the courage of some of the guys before us in other spaces that have been able to do that and kind of set the standard for us. And that's why I feel like such a personal responsibility to kind of continue that, in the roles that I have now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to all of you. So we know that it's important for everyone to be involved with the certification of the ERA, making sure that that is passed. But why do you feel that it's absolutely specifically necessary for Gen Z to be involved in this movement, as it will, once it's certified, it's really impacting the future of Gen Z? Rosie, you can go ahead and go. You want to talk?
I can go ahead and kick things off. Yeah, I think like exactly what you just said, although I don't really like the phrase that young people are the leaders of tomorrow, because I'm like, we're the leaders of today. Look at all of us on this panel, we're leaders and we're leading in our communities and we're leading movements now. But we really are the people that are going to be facing the effects and impacts of the Equal Rights Amendment and of all the policies that we are pushing for and the change we're pushing for. We are going to be the ones that are just going to be around the longest to see all that happen and be impacted the most. So it's really important that we are active in the fight for it. And I also think that young people have a really unique power and role in social movements. I think young people are often in more of a position to, kind of push the conversation, push the boundaries. We are often more progressive, we think, with a more intersectional lens. And we act in a way that we do have a little bit of privilege as young people to kind of, piss off some legislators. We can like do banner drops in the streets, kind of use our power as young people to like get attention. And so I think we also have that role in this movement. But it's with the Equal Rights Amendment and really with any constitutional amendment, getting it into the Constitution is the first step. And then once we get it into the Constitution, then we fight for what it really means. And young people, we are going to be the ones to fight for what it really means. And yeah, that was kind of rambled, but I will pass it off to someone else.
No, that was great. Thank you. Haley, could you talk a bit more about how you see the certification of the ERA impacting the advocacy work that you're doing with Lipstick and Rage?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything Rosie said, first of all, just to talk about the previous question quickly. And the other thing that I would add is that young people are being impacted by this now. I mean, we already talked about how the ERA would impact young people if passed. And so I think that young people deserve to have a voice in these conversations, and everything that we've talked about how this does impact young people, like legislators, people in power, older generations, like they need to hear that, and they need to hear that perspective. And I think as for how this is impacting my work, how it's impacting other work that people are doing, I think that it intersects with a lot of stuff. So again, talking about educational equity, it really will make it easier, I think, to pass legislation, and will make it more that like this is the standard. This isn't something we're trying to attain of like having equal rights. This is what the standard is. This is what the expectation is, and that people should be expected to follow that. And I just think that it will help to change the culture, like people have talked about. And I think that it will it will also help to protect all of the things that have already been passed pertaining to gender inequality and ensure that we can continue to build on that until we are living in a truly equitable world.
Great, thank you so much for that. It's very apparent that Gen Z showed up and showed out for this past election. And so we know that there are upcoming Senate runoff elections in Georgia that are crucial, as it will determine whether or not it will be more or less difficult to get the time limit removal on the ERA passed in the new Senate body. And the current running candidates, Reverend Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, are running for the 2 Senate seats in Georgia, and they are pro-equality candidates. So I wanted to ask Rosie, like, what are you and the members of Generation Ratified doing to spread awareness about the election? And what do you think is the best way to rally young voters, like teenagers who weren't able to vote in this past election but could vote now? How to get them to register to vote and actually vote?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I don't think we can stress the importance of these runoffs enough. I'm actually from Georgia, and I know a lot of people that are working there on the ground right now, and they are fired up. The balance of who controls the Senate lies in Georgia, and as we've seen these past 2 years, Republican leadership has just not taken action on the ERA. And it'll be a very uphill battle if we have the same Republican leadership. So these races are really like the fate of the Equal Rights Amendment over these next 2 years. And as we were talking about, young people have such a powerful vote, and it is so critical that we are getting young people to the polls again. And runoffs are especially tricky because really we know that Democratic leaders get elected when people turn out to vote. And when you're in a state like Georgia, where it's like ground zero for voter suppression, and on top of that, you're having to get people out to the polls again to vote, it is just that much more difficult. And as Mina was saying, we also have this really unique opportunity where there are thousands of people that are going to be turning 18 and are going to be able to vote that were not able to vote in November, but are going to be able to vote on the January 5th deadline. So my advice to people that are kind of looking to help get out the vote, help elect Ossoff and Warnock, help get young people to the polls, is really turning to organizations that are doing the work in Georgia, like the New Georgia Project, Fair Fight, and really looking to the organizers that have been doing the work, especially the Black women in Georgia that have been leading the fight. They are the ones who laid the groundwork for this. Honestly, not the campaigns themselves. I would turn to those groups that are really working to get out the vote. But these runoffs are so important, and we should all be involved in it, because even though it is a Georgia-specific race, I mean, it's the fate of women and people beyond the binary being included in the Constitution.
I completely agree with you, Rosie. And to wrap up our discussion for tonight, I would like to pose this last question that actually came from somebody who's watching our town hall tonight. How can boomers, a generation of boomers, help take a more active part, help us Gen Z take a more active part in the effort to certify the amendment? I can go ahead and start with Jude.
I think that I mean, one of the things that I noticed was that there are, I mean, for my doc, I interviewed, a lot of people in the boomer generation, and I think that they had these amazing stories about what it was like to be an activist then, and they all sort of knew what the ERA is and what the fight is about, and all the tactics that they could use. When I go to the Arizona legislature, pre-COVID, when I would go to like watch them vote on it, the gallery would be filled with boomers. And I mean, I think that it's difficult, if you have the time and you're retired, to go out and use your time as a retiree to go like be an activist, that is amazing. And I know that not everyone has that luxury or that privilege or that time. But if there are ways for you to get the word out to Gen Z to tell them to go do the same thing, I honestly just think that there are so many people that, I mean, at least that I know that would want to, if they knew about it, or could get out to the gallery to show support or call their legislator, but they just don't really know how to do that or what the tactics are. So we're trying to bridge that generational divide and like pass along your knowledge. That was something that was so, I feel so privileged to have been able to listen to the stories of the boomers and the generations before me and to learn from them. Because I, you know, when I started learning about the ERA a couple of years ago, I was like starting from nothing. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how to be an activist. And so them sharing their knowledge with me and taking the time to sit down with me, I mean, not just to be interviewed for the documentary, but just sort of to share their knowledge and to come to the university with me and talk to, you know, my peers and present the doc with me. That was so valuable for them to just volunteer their time and kind of impart that wisdom. Because once, you know, people had attended and knew about it, they took letters to send to our senator to go get rid of the timeline, to get it certified, and they were ready to do whatever they could with whatever time they had. So I think that is probably where we need to start, is just trying to pass along that knowledge. If you know about the ERA or have any of that wisdom for how to be an activist to share with us, that would be amazing. And then just include us, try to include us in that conversation. And I think that we'll show up.
Great answer. Thank you. Thank you. And Jules and Caleb, would you like to add anything about how older generations, since they are mostly the coaches and your training staff and like athletics, how they can help the younger generation with advocating for gender equality?
Yeah, you know, for us, when I say us, I'm talking about all the people that I've been blessed to work with. You know, when I think about that, I asked them to share their truths. And one thing that I established at our university was a web series for everybody to share their truths on a platform, whether that's within their team dynamic or throughout the entire athletic department. Because once we understand what they feel, what they know, what they've seen, once we understand the scope of their knowledge and what we've seen and how we can intertwine to move forward, I feel like that's a really big piece to the puzzle to understand what has been and what is now, so that we can create something for tomorrow and for today. So that's the one thing I asked them to do, because it's really like, it's not only eye-opening, it's a chance for us to connect, for us to like live in a world that is always constantly learning and educating one another. It's one of the most beautiful things we can do as people. So I just encourage all of them and everybody who's listening to do that, if you haven't already.
Yeah, just to kind of build off that one thing you said, Caleb, just the connection side of it. I think sometimes, you know, people don't realize how important it is just to have the conversations with the older generations and the people that have been through this before. But, you know, sometimes I feel like our generation are you know, we're more privy to focusing more on our phones and kind of, you know, being less connected. And I think this past summer for me, being able to speak to so many, you know, older generations about these things and have hard conversations with them, you realize kind of how important a lot of these things are to certain people, specifically coaches within our space. And, you know, kind of building off that now, there really are a lot of inspired coaches that want to help and just didn't really know how or didn't know what was right from wrong, but opening the door and having those conversations, they kind of understand more. And it's kind of just finding those allies and then building from there and kind of seeing what you can grow from that. So I think that's kind of the point where we're at with sports, specifically in lacrosse. And there really are a lot of passionate coaches that have been around the game for a really long time, that have seen it evolve and become more diverse and kind of see a lot of things change. And, you know, for us, it's just kind of continue to build those relationships.
Awesome. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So now we will be going to talk about the social media campaign that the ERA is actually launching in conjunction with the New Georgia Project. So we talked a bit about how it's important to spread awareness and information about the upcoming Senate elections in Georgia. And so we are launching a project with New Georgia Project. And basically, you will take a picture that is here and tag the ERA Coalition and the New Georgia Project and use the hashtag vote with NGP and ERA. And you're welcome to tag anyone that you know in Georgia just to get the awareness out so that people can vote. And down below, we have the important deadlines for the Georgia runoff election. So December 7th is the deadline to register to vote. December 14th, early voting starts. December 31st, early voting ends, and January 5th is election day. And we will also be sharing your pictures. You're also welcome to take a video talking about why you decided to vote and why you decided to register to vote. And we will be sharing that on our social media pages. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists that spoke tonight. It was a very thought-provoking and engaging conversation. I would also like to give a huge thanks to everyone who worked behind the scenes, to my team, the ERA Coalition, Carol, Bettina, Rachel, Catherine, Ellie, Eliana, and Ariana, who helped make this event a huge success. And thank you all once again for joining us and engaging in the discussion. Be sure to check out our website at www.eracoalition.org. And you can also watch a recorded version of this live event on the ERA Coalition's Facebook page. Thank you all and have a good night.